Greetings, fellow detectives. Wizard Kitten here, bringing you my review of the 27th mystery in the Nancy Drew series, Nancy Drew, The Deadly Device. As usual, my reviews are based on 5 separate categories. Those categories are plot, characters, setting and design, entertainment and gameplay value, and music and vibe. Each of those 5 categories is scored on a scale of 1 to 10, with a final total possible score out of 50, and then I assign a letter grade to each game as well. Just a quick warning before this review, the review will contain some mild plot spoilers. I won't be spoiling any major events in the game, but the spoilers are more related to things you might see in the promotional materials, such as the characters that you might encounter and some things that you might get to do in the game. So without further ado, let's get started with the plot of The Deadly Device. So for this mystery, Nancy is called in by, I think he's like a head researcher at the Technology of Tomorrow Today station. What do we want to call it? Research station, I guess. Research building company, something like that. But Nancy is called in by this head researcher because one of the other head researchers, Niko Jovic, was murdered. He was working on a Tesla coil, and he got electrocuted by the Tesla coil, but because he was so smart and because of all of the safety measures, the police labeled his death as suspicious. And because Niko was supposedly murdered and the case was still open, all of his research was kind of kept by the police, and Victor really wanted someone to solve the case quickly. He didn't want it to keep dragging on, so he calls in Nancy to try and solve the murder of Niko Jovic. Now, this is Nancy's first murder mystery since all the way back to Secrets Can Kill, which was her very first case. So we have case number 1 and case number 27 before Nancy is taking on another murder mystery, something as serious as a murder. And they kind of address that in the game too. Like, this is a big deal. This isn't just your average case. This isn't just mysterious accidents or missing treasure. This is the death of someone who is very important in the scientific community. So right away, we're going into this really kind of deep plot that has a lot of power, and I really appreciate that. I think that's super fun. Nancy spends the majority of the case really talking with all the suspects, who are essentially all the other scientists that work at the Technology of Tomorrow Today Center. There's only a handful of them because it's a smaller operation. So she spends time talking to those culprits and looking for clues within the building, attempting to figure out who could have killed Niko, why they could have killed him, and how they did it. So it's really a pretty straightforward murder investigation in that way, but the fact that we haven't really done that since Secrets Can Kill, and this plot is so much deeper than the Secrets Can Kill plot, makes it a really exciting case. And I think just all of the subplots that they managed to bring in it as well. Niko Jovic is very similar to Nikola Tesla, who is working on similar projects, and the Technology of Tomorrow Today building is essentially where Tesla's research building was as well. So in addition to this cool murder plot, we also get a little bit of information on Nikola Tesla and on his research and the drama surrounding him as a historical figure. And then we got a lot of nice kind of drama between all of the scientists and the characters in the building. This is a pretty science-heavy plot, but I feel like you don't necessarily have to enjoy science to enjoy the mystery. I am someone who does enjoy science, but physics is my least favorite branch of science, and this is definitely a physics-heavy game, and I was still able to enjoy it. If you are absolutely like, no, hate science, I think it's boring, it might be harder for you to get into the plot of this, but I still think there's a lot of really nice intrigue in that you get a lot of moments with the characters. There's a lot of just interpersonal drama. The fact that it's a murder mystery makes it really exciting. So even if you aren't super into science, I do still think that this game has a lot to offer plot-wise, and I think the plot is honestly pretty airtight. There are a couple times in the game where logistically things happen that don't necessarily make sense, and I definitely thought about giving this game a perfect 10 out of 10 for plot, but when I was thinking about that, those logistical problems that make things a little bit confusing, and the fact that this is based so heavily in science and might not be for everyone, made me kind of drop this down to a 9 out of 10. Still a great plot though. Next, let's move on to characters. So we have Victor Lassett, who is the head researcher that brings Nancy in to solve this case. We have a couple research scientists. There's Mason Quinto, who is, according to one of his coworkers, pretty much a very, very stereotypical scientist. He lives his life organized, analytical, logical, and it's really fun messing up the stuff on his desk. So feel free to do that just to annoy him, because he is kind of an annoying person. But that makes him fun to interact with because we dislike him enough that we actually feel something from him. Anyway, there's also Ellie York, who is another research scientist. She's definitely more down to earth than Mason, but still brilliant. We have Ryan Kilpatrick, who I'm not totally sure on her role at the building. She seems to be a scientist, but she kind of seems to be more mechanically inclined. So it's like she does more of the building and like the industrial engineering type stuff. Maybe she's more of an engineer than she is like a research or theoretical scientist, something along those lines. But she's always working with tools and things like that. And then we have Greg Courtwright, who is the security guard at the building and appeared to be a pretty good friend of Nico's, if Nico even had friends. He was said to be not very social as a person. I think the characters in this case are pretty awesome. They each have very distinct personalities, and it's really fun kind of interacting with them and seeing how those different personalities play out in conversations. For example, conversations with Mason can be very frustrating because he doesn't necessarily factor in feelings of others when he has conversations, whereas Ellie is totally different. You can definitely tell she's more of an intuitive, more of a feeling type of person. So you have two very different personalities that we get to interact with. Gray is very minimalistic, hardly says anything, very gruff. Ryan is extremely extroverted, very talkative, very goofy, very silly, very playful. So we really have a very wide range of character personalities in this game. And for the most part, I think it works really, really well. Having the conversations with them is really one of the biggest ways that Nancy gets clues in this mystery. It's how she solves this case for the most part, is getting, alibis and trying to figure out motive. She's obviously finding a lot of clues, but the character interaction is very important to solving this case. And the fact that they are enjoyable character interactions makes it pretty awesome. So I like the characters. I do think that some of the conversations err a little bit on the stereotypical side. So conversations with Ryan, for example, are like very silly, and I've never met another person who is that clever with words and is so ridiculous all the time. It's almost like talking with Yumi in Shadow at the Water's Edge. She's very high energy to the point where it feels like she's not necessarily a real person. I understand people that have high energy can often talk a lot, but they don't often talk that way. She feels very scripted, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. On the other side of things, you have conversations with Gray that sometimes take only 2 words and then he's kicking us out of his office, which it feels like they maybe could have done more to develop that gruffness rather than him just essentially saying nothing. It's like, why have him there as a character if he's not actually going to give us something once in a while? We can needle a little bit out of him, but it might have been nice to have just a smidge more. So while I really do enjoy the character interaction, I don't think it's perfect, but I do still give characters a very solid 9 out of 10. Next, let's move on to setting and design, which considers where the game takes place and how that setting is integrated into the overall plot and mystery. So this mystery takes place in Colorado at a research building, essentially a science lab. And Nancy spends the entirety of the case within that building, which honestly harkens back to the classic era of Nancy Drew games. We have mysteries like Message in a Haunted Mansion, Treasure in the Royal Tower, essentially Secret of the Scarlet Hand. We don't really go anywhere else in Secret of the Scarlet Hand besides the museum. Curse of Blackmore Manor, those mysteries where you're really kind of trapped in one big building and the mystery is concentrated there. There's no other reason to go anywhere else. The mystery and the plot are the main focus and they are in this building. I honestly really enjoy that style of setting and design because what that means is they're focusing more on the overall story and less about trying to show off where the mystery is taking place, as is often the case in a lot of mysteries that take place in foreign countries where we go to lots of different locations, but none of that actually feels very deep. This feels like a very complete building, and we get to explore a lot of it. We don't get to explore all of it. So it feels a little bit smaller than, say, Treasure in the Royal Tower, where we're not walking around quite as much. But I would argue that the rooms that we do explore are more detailed for the most part. So we're seeing more in each of those spaces, and we're able to interact with more when we actually get into the lab itself. That's a very busy space. The lounge has a lot going on. The different office buildings, you can look at a lot of the things in those different spaces. So I think the setting itself was crafted in a really excellent way. It does feel like a very legitimate lab. It feels very authentic. And I just appreciated the overall design of this place, the way they did the lighting and just the decoration of the whole spaces, like the set dressing and everything. It felt so real, and it really was cool to kind of immerse myself in that setting. Again, if you're not a huge fan of science, it's still just cool to explore. There are so many different things to see, and there are so many things that you need to find as well. So exploration is a huge part of this mystery, just like character interaction is. I honestly really enjoyed the setting. I appreciate that they didn't have to hit us over the head with the fact that we were in Colorado. They mentioned a snowstorm, and that's a pretty big part of living in Colorado is the snow. So honestly, that was a nice little reference to where we were without really badgering us about it with the whole mystery. So I give setting and design a very solid 10 out of 10. Next, we move on to entertainment and gameplay value, which considers how fun the game is to play and how fun it is to replay. Now, I do have a couple of qualms in this area, but I do want to say first and foremost that I think this is a really fun game. I really enjoy this one, and I think the reason I enjoy it so much is because I feel like it really honors what made the classic era Nancy Drew games so much fun, which was really the exploration and the story. The fact that we were in these really cool places with this really cool history and just really interesting characters populating that space and telling us their stories. So I think it definitely has vibes of the earlier Nancy Drew games, which I personally really enjoy. But it's also a new Nancy Drew game, so there's still a lot of really cool new elements that make this a very fun game to play. There are a ton of puzzles. This is a very puzzle-heavy game where I'm kind of noticing a theme the last couple games we've been playing. There's lots of puzzles. Shadow of the Water's Edge, Tomb of the Lost Queen, and now we're on Deadly Device, which is another very puzzle-heavy game. And a lot of the puzzles are related to physics, chemistry, coding, mechanics, just all of that science type work. I think a lot of the puzzles make a lot of sense. I'm not a huge fan of puzzles that feel like they are added purely for an extra puzzle to do. For example, aggregation in this game is probably my least favorite minigame. And I know there are detectives that love it, but oh boy, I hate that game. It just gets so frustrating and it goes on for forever. And you only have to play it once, but then you can sit there and play it as much as you want. That's fine. It's a fun little game. It's added in. It can be there. It doesn't have to be. What I really like are the puzzles that feel like you need to solve because you would need to solve them in real life. So for example, one of the puzzles, you need to make an etching solution. And figuring out the way to do that is a logical puzzle that's still very science-based, but feels like something that Nancy would actually need to do if she was solving the case in real life. It feels important. It feels necessary. And there's a lot of those puzzles in this game. So even though it is very puzzle-heavy, I think the puzzles do justify their existence. A couple of the things that make this game drop down from like a perfect 10, for example, the culprit is very easy to guess. And I don't know if that's as an experienced player playing this game. It just was very obvious to me who the culprit would end up being. But I think most people that are familiar with mysteries and how mysteries work, and specifically people who are familiar with Nancy Drew games and know how they work, it was pretty clear pretty early on who the culprit was going to be. That takes away a little bit of the entertainment for me because I want it to be more of a mystery. I don't want to have figured it out so easily. Kind of like the same problem I had in Alibi and Ashes where the culprit was just way too easy to guess. That was definitely a little bit of a problem for me. And the fact that some of the puzzles can be very overwhelming. I do, however, extremely appreciate the fact that the Hardy Boys give Nancy clues when she calls them. Again, harkening back to the classic era of Nancy Drew games. And the task list is definitely a little more specific than it was in Tomb of the Lost Queen. And that's part of them adjusting to the new design interface. They had one style that they used all the way up through Alibi and Ashes, all the way up through game 25. And this is only the second game with the new interface. And I think the tweaks that they made, the problems that were in Tomb of the Lost Queen, they fixed a lot of them that were in that game for this game, which definitely makes it stronger in my opinion. So while I do have a couple of little qualms overall, I think this is a very fun game to play. So I give The Deadly Device an 8 for entertainment and gameplay value. And finally, we move on to music and vibe, which considers the overall atmosphere of the game and how the music and vibe are conveyed. I absolutely love the atmosphere of this game. There is not a ton of jump-in-your-face scare factor. It's not really a scary game, but I always feel slightly worried and slightly scared playing this game. There's nothing obviously scary. There's no monsters, there's no ghosts, there's no zombies. Like, there's nothing jumping out at you saying boo. But the fact that there's a murderer on the loose is scary enough. And I think they do a great job with the atmosphere of the game, getting that sense of fear and foreboding across. I mean, people are talking about the murder, and when Nancy brings it up, they shy away from the topic. They react very naturally to it, which I think is a great way to convey vibe, because if they're feeling uneasy talking about it, then we feel uneasy even asking about it. They also do a really great job having little sounds in the background as Nancy is walking around. So you'll hear like a creak of a floorboard, or like something falls over, or something clinks right behind you. And that's oftentimes when you're like really focused working on a puzzle. And it just makes you want to like turn around and be like, who's there? It's the murderer. I'm going to die. So I think they do a great job with the vibe there. And the music in this game, oh my gosh, love the music. It has kind of this like techno electronica vibe to it, but at the same time, it's still very soothing and still very fun. Like, it's definitely not a dance beat by any means. It's more relaxed, almost ambient in a way. Ambient, but still sounding electronic, which I think is perfect for this game because it's all about electricity. It's all about Tesla coils. It's all about science. So it should sound that way. It should sound very futuristic while still also feeling mysterious. And I think they hit the perfect balance with that. So I give music and vibe a perfect 10 out of 10. So if we add up all of our scores, we have a 9 for plot, 9 for characters, 10 for setting and design, 8 for entertainment and gameplay value, and 10 for music and vibe, which gives us a total possible score of 46 out of 50 and a final grade of an A-. So, pretty solid game. Now, would I recommend that you play this game? Definitely. I think this game is really fun, and I honestly think it's one of the more underrated Nancy Drew games. I think it exceeds expectations for the newer Nancy Drew games. I think it does a lot of really great things. For people who are very attached and feel a lot of nostalgia for the classic era Nancy Drew games, this game blends all of the best things of the new games with a lot of the things that made the classic games so memorable for us. I'm one of those people that definitely has a nostalgic connection to the classic era. This new modern era is able to do the same things. And I think that's what makes The Deadly Device such an awesome game, especially after a game like Tomb of the Lost Queen, where they're like trying some newer things that don't always necessarily work. I think this is a great example of going back to basics, having a really cool story, having some really interesting characters in a standard setting that's really fun to explore, some really cool puzzles, and some really great music. Honestly, I think everything comes together quite well. Is it perfect? No, but it's super fun, and I definitely think it's one of the more solid iterations in the Nancy Drew series. Thank you so much for listening to this review, detectives. I do hope that you enjoyed it. Please feel free to like and comment down below what your thoughts and opinions are on this game. Also, please feel free to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more Nancy Drew content. Thank you so much for listening, fellow detectives. I will see you soon.